This is Ian Olander, and this is my BIO181 lab. My final presentation is on the Black Death, the bubonic plague, one of the deadliest plagues in recorded history. So let's go ahead and get into it and find out what caused this and dig down deep. So we're going to be going into a technical overview about how the bubonic plague is passed, um, how it affects the body, and then how it can be treated, and then finally global concerns concerning, especially in this day and age, we know the pandemic has been on people's minds. So what do we do in case people get the bubonic plague? So let's begin with a technical overview. The Yersinia pestis bacteria is ultimately the cause of the bubonic plague. It's a bacteria that actually has been around um, in humanity for over 5,000 years. There was a Yersinia pseudotuberculosis that was in the region of the Mediterranean, and then over time it evolved to different strains of virulence. And at least in terms of recorded history, this particular bacteria has been responsible for 200 million deaths. For example, in 1500s Europe, medieval Europe, roughly a third of continental Europe died. And that massive death toll had such an effect on society in terms of availability of things like even cash or inheritance, loss of family, devastation and loss of workers in the field, craftsmen. The impact was incalculable and fundamentally changed the history of Europe and, of course, the history of the world. So, and of course, that was 500 years ago. In this day and age, as we've seen with the pandemic, a very virulent strain could bring the world to its knees. It's been a potential fear for a very long time, so we want to know more about it. Now, oftentimes when we think of the plague, we would say bubonic plague, and that actually refers to there are lymph nodes that you have in your neck or arm or groin, and what would happen is if you had the bubonic plague, which was one of the types of infection or body's reactions to this bacteria, what would happen is you'd have these swellings in your lymph nodes that were at your neck or your arm. You can see there in the leg, for example, on the inside of his thigh or near the groin. And those are called buboes. And so that's why they call it the bubonic plague. And they would ooze pus and blood. To the plague could also become airborne. It could actually be spread in particles, spray, for example, from coughing and things like that. And so if it was inhaled, it would actually enter through the lungs and the body would have a reaction to that. And then also septicemic. This is actually blood poisoning, sepsis. And so basically the blood itself is poisoned and it spreads throughout the blood and could lead to all kinds of problems. But beginning at the very core, it's the Yersinia pestis bacteria. You can see the bacteria down here, excuse me, gram stained red, and it lives inside the flea. The flea is its primary host, but it doesn't obviously just confine itself to the flea. Instead, it can infect this other host. And what it will do is it will very sneakily avoid the immune system and end up hiding out in the lymph nodes, which sends out their various hormones and things like that to the body. So from there it can spread. And actually, it's rather ingenious because it hides out in vacuoles. We learned about vacuoles. It hides out in the vacuoles of macrophages, or which are cells that are part of the immune system that actually eat macrophages. They eat um, other invaders and dead material and things like that. And the thing is the bacteria itself doesn't cause the death. It's actually the reaction of the host that is the primary cause of death. And we're going to get to that. The victims, as we talked about, Initially, it starts from the flea, which will usually infect rodents, but humans are secondary victims. And so the way it can be transmitted, obviously, if you're close to rodents or close to other creatures that could be carrying fleas, then flea bites can transmit it to you. And so it could be cause an infection in the blood. So it would be the septicemic version, or it could cause the bubonic reaction that occurs in the lymph nodes. If a person has it, were to cough in your vicinity, it could actually come in through your lungs, as we talked about. It's one of the reasons why the doctors of old had this particular getup. They didn't really truly understand what was going on. They thought maybe it was bad air, and so the air had to be breathed in and small. But notice, at least wisely, they had all their body parts covered up, so it would limit their potential for transmission. And if there was any breaks in the skin, or if there was any um, way the bacteria would get on the eyes, then too it could enter the body that way and cause either the sepsis in the blood or bubonic type of infection. So as we talked about now, diagnosis and treatment. What happens if you get it? Well, if we look at that particular chart right there, we see, of course, high fever and chills, breathing constrictions. You'd have noisy breathing, shortness of breath, the opening of those swollen buboes, as we talked about it. You notice in the picture, you can see it's at the armpits or the groin, for example, but it would also be in the legs. If it's infecting the lungs, then you would see a coughing of blood, and again, that could cause it to spread pneumatically into the air. Your blood could become poisoned, causing gangrene. That's that septicemic. And of course, because your blood is close to the skin, it can actually cause discoloration of the skin and so forth. Ultimately, why you die is not from the bacteria itself, but it's the collapse of things like your respiratory system or your circulatory system. And as we talked about, the effect that it has had, the deaths that it has caused are amazing in terms of numbers. Untreated, you have a greater than 90% chance of dying. But, and this is the amazing thing, if you're treated, you only 5% will die. In other words, if you're treated well and you see a man there who seems to be in advanced stages, he's got gangrene on his fingers because of the blood poisoning and so forth, he's not going to die more than likely because usually it's 5% or less. So what do? You, how do they diagnose it? Well, first, if you have any of those symptoms, just as part of checking you out when you go into the doctor, they'll just ask you about your patient history, ask you if you've traveled anywhere, you've been interacting with animals. Generally speaking, getting the plague is very rare these days, so it's not going to be the first thing that people test for. Um, but if those do trigger any warning signs, then they will test for the bacteria there. As far as treatment goes, in Europe, there are vaccines. If you do have it, there are powerful antibiotics that are available that basically kill the virus and help the body to recover to kill the virus. And of course, I'm sorry, not virus, the bacteria. But then, if things are all, if there is an outbreak, HEPA containment protocols can be put into place to uh, keep it from spreading, as you see there with the HEPA and the person with their full get up. As far as research goes, of course, we in this day and age know the potential that a sickness, whether a virus or bacterial infection or epidemic or whatever, can cause just as it occurs naturally. But if it was weaponized, that could even that could make that could be a truly horrific thing. So research is being done because of the potential of it being a biological weapon, and so vaccines are continually being tested and developed to make sure that they have something that, if such a thing happened, if it was used as a biological weapon, God forbid, then it would be able to be contained. But as far as prevention, can be scary to talk about this and think, well, wait, can I get this? We've seen this, do I need to worry? I got a cough, I have a headache, what do I do? Well, there's a number of things. First of all, since we know it primarily comes from fleas, it comes from things like rodents. We want to rodent-proof our house. So for example, here we see a number of um, good suggestions to keep mice out of our house, so we eliminate nests and things like that, so we eliminate the source. We also want to report any dead animals, so animal control can come and get them. If we have to handle them ourselves, then we want to use gloves. For our pets, since pets can bring in fleas, they need to have flea collars. And if we do spend a lot of time outdoors, then we would definitely want to consider using insect repellent. As far as the global impact, in the US, there's only about 20 cases annually, 20 or less. And worldwide, 1,100, which, when you consider the world population of over 8 billion, that's not, or nearly 8 billion, that's a very small percentage. So at least we're doing well there so far. But again, as we talked about, there are potential dangers, like we talked about biological weapons. Then, too, over time, bacteria can develop antibiotic resistance. And if an outbreak happens and it's not contained, then it has a potential for causing an epidemic. So, how do we deal with that? Well, we need to educate people about the transmission vectors, the ways we talked about through fleas, through rodents, through touching dead animals, things like that. Sanitation programs continue to be implemented and keep places clean, but we also want to make sure our homes and neighborhoods are clean. Effective reporting and treatment protocols are critical so that if there are cases of bubonic or of this plague, that it can be handled immediately, quarantine if necessary, and of course you need somebody to oversee it, and usually that would be government or government organizations, World Health Organization, the CDC, and so forth. Uh, it the Black Death is one of the most has had one of the greatest impacts in recorded history, and it is still a potential threat today. Thankfully, we do have treatments that make it so that this is not something that is going to kill us statistically. But and there is the potential for vaccines in the future. But at the same time, it's always better to be prepared. So hopefully you guys can take this particular presentation to heart and make sure that you do all that you can to avoid getting the Black Death and having it visit you and poke you in the chest like you see there in that picture. Have a great day.